Hello, good morning. I'm Ashley. This is John. um, just by way of hands, just so I have an idea, how many people know what Stripe actually does? All right, this is right crowd.
Well, you asked how many know. How many don't know? Oh, there's still a few. Okay. Some work
why
for the
don't-
marketing department. Yeah.
I mean, just to kick it off a little bit, why don't I met you about 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. You guys were just starting out. You were just like a handful of people in this San Francisco office, and you've grown a lot since then. Why don't you just explain a little bit what Stripe is and maybe kind of what the original vision was and now sort of what you're trying to do?
Yeah. The vision actually has remained pretty consistent for Stripe over time. For a long time, the way we've thought about the opportunity has been growing the internet economy, increasing the GDP of the internet. And I think one of the things that happens is, I'm sure when we first met, and you have these, Irish hooligans talking about these grand notions of growing the internet economy, you're like,
you're not exactly what I think of as an Irish hooligan.
Anyway, I mean, the company's at a much earlier stage, whereas over time we've gotten to actually meaningfully work on that in a whole bunch of different areas. And so the core thing that the Stripe product does is help businesses start and grow, accept payments online. But over time now, since I guess we've known each other, Stripe has now expanded into a whole bunch of different countries. We actually just announced our private betas getting up and running in Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania and Malaysia and a handful of new countries. And we've even kind of branched out into a few other lines of business as well. But that's the core of what we've been doing. That's what we were doing when we started out, and it's still what we're doing today.
And you feel like that original mission, you've been able to stay mostly chasing what you expected to chase?
Yeah, because we're lucky. We picked something that there's a big opportunity, and I think there's a lot left to run on it. I think in general we have. It's quite surprising to me how poor the economic infrastructure available to us on the internet is, in that if you think about it, we have this amazing global information network with 3 billion people hooked up to it and exchanging information all around the world. And then when it comes to anything involving money, it's like you're going back 40 years. You're dealing with it's slow to move things around, and you have all these different networks that aren't interoperable. And that in the West we're used to credit cards, but in China you have Alipay and WeChat, and you have UPI in India, and you have different systems in all these different countries that don't work together well. And again, we're sort of accepting of the fact that it takes, cost $30 to send money to a faraway place, and it'll take many days to land or might be rejected. I think our standards are too low for the economic infrastructure available to people and to businesses, and that's what we're working on fixing.
I think you and I were emailing. I'd just been to Shenzhen a few months ago, and I mean, I've been to China a few times, but it had been a little while, and it was crazy because I could not use my credit card anywhere except for my hotel. They would begrudgingly take cash, which was hard to get out of an ATM with a sort of Western ATM card, and but then the payments were so easy. We were shooting a TV show, and I was with this local fixer, and everywhere he went, he's just doing his QR codes. I mean, what do you make of the transformation in the payment system there, and like how far ahead are they than the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest thing, is I think people tended to think, especially when we started out on Stripe, people tended to think that the move online had already happened and everything had been figured out. Whereas in fact, still in a bunch of countries, you're getting a very rapid rise in digital money. The dominant behaviors and methods are changing. Alipay and WeChat sort of came out of nowhere as payment players, relatively speaking, to end up winning the market, as it were, in China in particular. But again, more broadly, this was something where, I mean, literally when we started out, I remember when we were pitching investors in 2010, and they're like, I mean, isn't PayPal already fine? And, isn't this market already all figured out? Whereas in fact, sub 5% of global consumer spending takes place online today. We think that has an order of magnitude left to grow, and we'd like to help it get there as quickly as possible.
Are we going to do QR codes in the U.S.? I know we do on scooters and things like that, but is this, or I feel like we've already been there, done that here.
Yeah, well, this gets to a very interesting phenomenon, which is, you tend to get multiple hype waves of technologies before they actually catch on. And so, a lot of people don't know this, but say, cryptocurrencies, there was a hype wave around cryptocurrencies in the 1990s, like a guy called Nick Szabo, published, talking about BitGold in 1998, and various other kind of interests in it. But it's then only in kind of 2010, 2011 that Bitcoin took off in a big way. Similarly, I think, QR codes were the kind of thing that people were always waiting to happen and then didn't. But now in iOS 12, there's, native support for QR codes in the operating system, and so maybe you'll see behaviors change. I don't know about payments in particular, maybe, but certainly we're seeing with other things, like you say, scooters.
So you guys just raised, excuse me, $350 million about, and that brought your valuation to $23 billion now, which is crazy. And why, why do you, by all marks, you guys have done really well. Why take this money? I mean, did you have to take this money? Why would somebody in you guys' position still give away more of your company at this point?
Just, for any investors who are watching, it's not crazy. Just want to just want to clarify that. But the round was actually a little smaller than you were saying. But broadly speaking, Stripe is not done. We're not at the terminal stages of the business or anything like that. And in our case, we're not. We have no plans to go public. We still are heavily investing in growing the business. And if you kind of look at the stage that Stripe is at today in terms of how quickly headcount is growing and the amount we're investing in international expansion, it still feels like a startup in a whole bunch of regards. There's still brand new products being created all the time. Like just last year, we launched 2 brand new products, Stripe Terminal, which is for people accepting in-person payments, and Stripe Issuing, which is a way for people to actually it's the reverse side of Stripe, for people to spend money in the broader world. And so kind of the short answer is that there's still a ton left to do, and we're quite early in the trajectory of what we hope will be pretty meaningfully changing how the online economy works.
Mike Cannon-Brookes, who runs Atlassian, I've talked to him in the past, and they were largely self-funded, tried not to take venture capital. I think we're profitable from year one. And he argues that there's kind of like this cult of venture capital, especially in Silicon Valley, and it's like this, I raised so much money, and this point of pride, when really it's sort of could be a weakness that you have to do this, and it puts all this extra pressure on you. I mean, so, like, what's your take on, I guess, maybe the funding environment right now and this culture?
Yeah, I have to admit, I've never understood the culture war that exists over VC funding. Like, it's the most fascinating thing for people to argue about, where, as you say, there are some people who are, I don't think there's a particularly loud pro-VC camp. There's like a quite loud anti-VC camp. But it feels like the reality of the matter is all businesses tend to require some amount of initial capital before they get to reliable profitability. And that can come from personal credit cards on the smaller end and just people investing their own money. That can come from friends and family rounds. It's traditional. People outside of Silicon Valley starting businesses, that tends to be where it comes from. And then VC, and even now I think in 2019 there's much larger pools of private capital available than there were. And the answer to what's right for a business, it depends. It depends on whether the dynamics of the business. There's a super awesome company, Boom. You've probably come across them, developing a supersonic airliner. Great company. Will probably require a bunch of capital, before they actually get to shipping and certifying a supersonic airliner.
It would be hard to fund that without.
Exactly. Yeah. Hard one to bootstrap. And then there's other businesses that are more amenable to bootstrapping. But it's people are trying to come up with absolute answers as to whether VC is right for for you or whether VC is a good thing, when it completely depends on the business and honestly what the founder wants to do with it. Yeah.
Like in this moment in time, money is relatively easy to come by, easier than maybe it ever has been. You know, like, is this a good thing for the environment?
It tends to.
I know it's good probably for the people trying to run startups out here, but
well, yeah, I think there's a reflection of two things. One is that that there are companies that are staying private longer, and so there are more options for companies that want to do ambitious things as private companies. As you've written a whole bunch about Elon and his endeavors, and SpaceX is a good example of a company that I think previously 10 or 20 years ago would have been public by now, but is not in this day and age. And then the second thing is, I think, a reality of the fact that people have this market available to them of 3 billion internet users that is so enormous, and you have to ask yourself the question of, are all the interesting opportunities tapped out? Like, have the all the products that need to be built been built, or will they be built by the big Googles and Facebooks and Amazons? And the answer to that is so clearly no. And so as a result, the fact that you can have a talented team of entrepreneurs and software developers and people build a company and maybe ramp up to $10 million, $100 million of revenue in pretty short order. Again, that just really wasn't possible 10 or 20 years ago because the market sizes weren't there. And I think that's why you're seeing the enthusiasm for seed funding that still exists. I think the returns show that it's not mistaken.
So very smart people have argued for a long time that there are no more big ideas in physical hardware, that all the big inventions have already been taken. And then on the internet, Peter Thiel, I think as far back as like 6 or 7 years ago, was sort of arguing that there were no big ideas left on the internet. And I mean, I guess you guys would be one thing that proves them wrong on that, but you're absolutely convinced that there's plenty of...
Peter Thiel has repeatedly made that argument of the sort of declinism argument that Founders Fund controversially makes, and then Founders Fund, his venture capital firm, is an extraordinarily successful consumer internet investing vehicle, and so I'm not sure what to make of that.
Well, he used to be anti-China, and now he's pro-China as well. So you can change your mind.
Right.
I don't mean this next question to sound as cheap as it is, but just knowing you and your brother, I mean, so Tiger Global has put a lot of money into Juul as well. Mm-hmm. When you're thinking about taking money from someone, especially in light of someone like the SoftBank stuff in Saudi Arabia and things, I mean, did you think about that at all, or you were just happy to get hundreds of millions of dollars?
Sorry, did we think about Juul specifically?
Well, the Tiger, Juul's a fairly controversial company, especially kind of given what's going on with smoking among young people. And yeah, so I was just curious if that gave you could take money from just about anyone.
I mean, the short answer is we absolutely do think about who is investing in Stripe, and again, given that we're building the company for the long term, who the right shareholders are, and we have a large contingent of employee shareholders, but then kind of in terms of outside shareholders who we want to be partnering with for that. I actually find the Juul debate in particular an interesting one, and I haven't quite made up my mind on it. Like I'm still trying to reason through it, because it seems like there's some amount of replacement of kind of smoking with non-smoking, which is a very positive health benefit. There's some amount of increase in teen vaping, which it seems fairly clear is a negative health effect. But I haven't seen, maybe people have done this research, what kind of the relative effects of those are, and if you make good faith efforts to prevent teens from actually using the product, kind of how much credit you get for that. So I was having this discussion with some folks recently. I was trying to puzzle through what I think of Juul.
So that didn't like really factor into any of your decision making though on the funding or anything like that?
I mean, we definitely thought about it.
Yeah. Okay. There's one thing as a writer that you guys do that I find fascinating, which is
right.
is that you actually have a book publishing arm. You have I think a quarterly magazine that, and you bought a site called Indie Hackers. both of which tell stories about startups, about how to run a business well, sort of lessons. Why does Stripe have, and I think you also have some surprises that are coming up that I know about that's even more media. So, why does Stripe have a publishing arm? Is this just because I know you and your brother are avid readers and you're into this stuff, or is this something else going on, a longer term play with this?
I think there's a there's a cynical view of Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley companies that some people hold, that companies tend to be, very mission-oriented in how they at least talk about themselves and kind of conduct themselves, but maybe kind of secretly they're just in it for a buck, and they're trying to come up with the best branding possible. And at least in Stripe's case, again, you and I have had many conversations about this over the years. We really are excited, which is, perhaps odd given it's a bit of an abstract notion, but we're excited about this notion of growing the online economy and kind of pushing forward technological and economic progress through the tools and services that Stripe can create. And again, I very personally feel this, where the place I grew up, it was in pretty rural Ireland, and I just feel like I would not have had the set of possibilities and opportunities that I did without just being able to kind of bop around on the internet and discover all this fascinating stuff and eventually start a company and things like that. And so, given that we take this mission really seriously, one of the things we haven't done is just narrowly stick to, okay, Stripe makes this core Stripe payments product, so we're just going to do that, and we're going to keep ourselves blinkered when it comes to anything else we might do. There are many ways you could potentially go about growing the online economy. One thing that we noticed, the inspiration for Increment, the engineering magazine you're talking about, is we noticed that Silicon Valley engineering best practices tend to be these closely guarded trade secrets, that there'll be things that Google has figured out and Netflix has figured out, and they're actually kind of open secrets within a handful of engineering companies, but then if you're starting a company from scratch today, you might not have access to that knowledge or know the best way to operationalize a distributed database, or whatever it is. And so our thought with Increment was, we can at least just do a better job of propagating this engineering knowledge into the wider ecosystem such that more people have access to it. Same with Stripe Press, our book publishing arm. The tagline is ideas for progress, where if one incremental person is inspired to get into technology or to start a company, then we have, again, meaningfully helped achieve that mission. It's not in a way we can directly monetize, that's absolutely fine, but you're taking all these different cuts on working on achieving the mission. And as you say, we've kind of more stuff in the works. We're always trying to generate these new ideas. And part of it is, we will test and learn with these approaches, where we'll, the test cycles have to be a bit longer. It's not, you can't run an A/B test and see the results the next day. You have to do book publishing for a while at some scale and try and reason about the impact. And so I think it'll be a number of years before we can have any kind of an intelligent hypothesis on how it's performed. But we're, I'm open to any other crazy ideas that you have for
I have plenty.
Ways we could go about accomplishing the mission.
Well, so, just like you just said, you guys are so pro-startup, you're so pro-internet. We're in this moment where clearly the outside world is questioning Silicon Valley in a pretty big way, and everything that comes out of this place. What's your take on this moment of reckoning for the Valley in the mainstream world?
Well, first off, I think it's not unexpected in that many of the tech companies have become large enough and kind of all-encompassing enough in certain domains that of course you're going to see this in some regard. And one thing that's somewhat interesting is that companies that tend to get big in other domains tend to be regulated as they grow, and so if you're a bank, you grow as a small bank, and maybe you're regulated at the state level, and then after a while you're regulated. You have a federal charter, and so you have these various regulators. You're interacting with government kind of all along the way. Same way, if you work in, if you're an oil company, there'll be all sorts of regulators that you're dealing with. In the case of Silicon Valley companies, it tends to be more of a step function where there's a long period during which they're kind of self-governing, and then at a certain point it's like, okay, no, we actually have to think about. I mean, it's pretty clear that the 2016 elections were a point of not just where the kind of the public discourse turned, but clearly where the Silicon Valley, a number of the Silicon Valley content companies started introspecting quite a bit differently versus how they had before. But the other thing I think that people forget is that I think people equate the software industry with Silicon Valley, and the hip name brand companies tend to be based here. But I think it's also important to remember that we are excited about this arc of technological progress, and how much more of the economy is moving onto the internet and the opportunities that creates, and just how many of the successful software companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. And so, has anyone here heard of Constellation Software?
Oh.
There's one hand in the room. Yeah, Constellation Software is an extraordinarily successful software company. They're like a $21 billion company. They're based in Toronto, Canada, but they're just fairly quiet about what they do. They're a conglomerate with kind of all manner of different kinds of businesses. Tyler Technologies in Plano, Texas is another one. There's a huge amount of the software boom that is happening, and kind of the opportunities that entrepreneurs are creating are happening in sort of a low-key way outside Silicon Valley and outside the US in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I'm just keeping an eye on time, and I wanted to try something a little bit different, because I know you're like a student of business. You read so many books about all these companies' ups and downs over the decades. Now that you have some hindsight on running Stripe, I mean, give me like 2 or 3 examples of stuff you wish you had done differently, mistakes that you made, like for people in the audience, something, if you're on this crazy journey, are there what are these 2 or 3 key lessons that you experienced?
It's so hard to give generalized business advice or lessons. I mean, it's so dependent on.
But even like if there's an anecdote that just applies to you guys, but sort of something you wish you had done a different way.
We always paid a huge amount of attention to hiring, and but both at kind of the individual level, and then over a while, after a while, the organization gets big enough, and you have to start thinking about hiring at the leadership level, and kind of the various people who are running the organizations, and the reason it's so important is because, one, I think many founders tend to go through a transition of thinking about the tasks and the problems at hand, where it's I want to accomplish this business goal, or we need to add these functions to the product, to thinking about things organizationally, where it's what are the people or who are the people that I need to bring along with me to actually accomplish what I'm looking to do, but kind of moving from thinking about tasks to thinking about things in people terms. But and also from a cultural point of view, you are not just, especially in the early stages of a company, you're not just hiring that person, you're hiring their effect on the culture and the norms they will create within the company, and the people they will hire. Many of our most impactful kind of early hires, what they did was they brought along a whole number of other Stripes with them. So I think we paid a lot of attention to that. I think even still, if I'm to look back over kind of the history of Stripe, we could have paid more attention to matters of people. And in particular, when you have the wrong person in a role, it's really, it's just like really hard and kind of painful to solve that, because it's never going to be quite the top priority on your list, despite the compounding long-term impact. And I think it's, you're also not qualified almost to judge because you're a little bit too close to it. And so we as a Stripe leadership team, try to hold each other accountable of where, you're always asking, is this working? And, is this person kind of doing their job right? Because when you're super close to it, it can actually, your judgment is colored, and it can be hard to be a good judge of that. And so when I see, when I talk to other founders and when I see businesses not living up to their potential, I think it is arguably because they are compromising on people or not having the hard conversations with others or with themselves that they need to be having. Again, that's a little bit generalized, but that's certainly one.
What's Elon's motto? If somebody should be fired, fire them. The sooner the better, I think, is the...
It's certainly true that people have never, after firing someone, they said, I think I did that too soon. That is never the case. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for showing up. Thank you, John, for your time. And thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks, man.